I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not someone who believes in ghosts. I grew up alone in a quiet house, raised myself through silence and absence, and learned early that the world doesn't offer comfort just because you need it. I was practical, grounded, the kind of person who hears a noise in the dark and looks for the rational explanation before considering anything else. So when I tell you that something spoke to me from my basement, in a voice I recognized, belonging to a man I didn't yet know was dead, I need you to understand that I have spent years trying to find another explanation. I haven't found one. The tragedy arrived before I was old enough to carry it properly. My parents were taken in a car accident when I was still a child. My father never left the hospital. My mother survived, but survival and recovery are different things, and what came home from that hospital was a quieter, more fragile version of the woman I had known. Her body healed slowly. The distance between us healed not at all. She moved through the house like someone still in shock, present in the physical sense, absent in every way that mattered. I grew up in the space that loss creates, an empty house, unanswered questions, the particular loneliness of living beside a parent who is grieving too hard to fully see you. Uncle Daniel was the one consistent presence in those early years. He visited regularly, filled rooms with noise and warmth, treated me with the easy affection of someone who understood what I was missing. He was the closest thing to a father figure I had, and I held on to that without fully realizing how much until it was gone. When I was 16, his visits began thinning out. Weeks passed without hearing from him, then months. My mother deflected every question I asked about him with the particular vagueness of someone protecting a truth they haven't decided how to share yet. I stopped asking eventually. I told myself he had simply drifted away, the way adults sometimes do when life rearranges itself around them. I filled the silence the way teenagers do. Late nights, distractions, anything loud enough to push back the quiet that seemed to press against the walls of that house from the inside. My mother had remarried by then and spent most of her time elsewhere, returning for occasional dinners before leaving again. The house was mine in every practical sense. I told myself I preferred it that way. I almost believed it. The night I will never fully stop thinking about was in January. The Christmas tree was still standing in the living room. We hadn't taken it down yet, and its lights cast slow, colored patterns across the ceiling in the dark. I'd gone to bed at a normal hour. Max curled at my feet the way he always was, his weight and warmth the most reliable comfort in that house. I woke up sometime after midnight to find the bed empty beside me. Max was gone. I lay still for a moment, listening. The house had a specific quality of silence at that hour. Deep, complete, the kind of silence that has texture. But underneath it, something felt different. An absence of the right sounds, a presence of something I couldn't name. I got up and moved into the hallway. He was at the top of the basement stairs, just standing there, completely still in a way that Max almost never was. His eyes were fixed on the basement door at the bottom of the steps, with an attention so absolute it looked less like animal instinct and more like recognition, like he was watching something I couldn't see. His tail hung motionless, not tucked, just still. The stillness of an animal that has made a decision about what it's dealing with. Max, I kept my voice low. What is it? He didn't turn around. I came down beside him and looked at the door. Closed. The small gap at the bottom showed nothing. No light, no movement, no shadow shifting against the frame. I reached past him and flipped the basement light switch. Nothing changed in his posture. He remained exactly where he was, eyes on the door, as though the light made no difference to whatever he was perceiving. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still on the switch, the specific feeling of being watched settling over me like cold water. I couldn't explain it. The door was closed. The basement was lit. There was no logical reason for my heart to be moving the way it was. I grabbed Max by the collar and brought him back upstairs. I shut the basement door and locked it. I sat on the edge of my bed and told myself it was nothing. A smell, a sound below human hearing, something that had caught his attention and would pass by morning. But Max kept looking at the door from across the room. Every few minutes, a low sound in his throat. Not quite a whine, something quieter than that. Something that sounded almost like reluctance. I went back downstairs 20 minutes later. I'm still not entirely sure why. I was raised to handle things myself. The absence of a father in the house had made that a necessity rather than a choice. I wasn't going to lie in bed while my dog stared at a locked door and tell myself everything was fine. So I went. Max followed me to the top of the basement stairs and stopped. He wouldn't descend. He planted himself at the threshold as though the first step represented a line he had decided not to cross, and watched me with an expression that, in a human face, I would have called dread. I looked at him. I looked at the door at the bottom. I said out loud, into the silence, "Is someone there?" The words sounded ridiculous the moment they left my mouth. Then I opened the door and started down. Each step produced its own specific creak, a sound I had heard thousands of times in that house, completely familiar. But familiarity does nothing for you when something beneath the familiar has shifted. The air in the stairwell was colder than it should have been. My breathing had become shallow without me deciding to change it. I reached the bottom step, and I heard it. A voice, his voice, weak, strained at the edges, like a signal coming through interference, but unmistakably, completely, without any possible doubt. Uncle Daniel's voice, rising from somewhere in the darkness at the far end of the basement, saying my name, the way he had always said it. "Come down here." My mind stopped. I don't mean I was confused or frightened or trying to process what I'd heard. I mean the part of me that forms coherent thoughts simply ceased to function for several seconds. Oh, there was only the voice, and the darkness, and the sound of my own heartbeat filling my ears. Then my legs moved. I crossed the basement floor without making a decision to do so, my eyes adjusting to the dim light, scanning every shadow. The main room was empty, just storage, the old water heater, boxes I hadn't opened in years. The silence had returned completely, as if the voice had never existed. "Uncle Daniel?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. Nothing. The laundry room door stood half open at the far corner of the basement. I moved toward it slowly, each step deliberate, every instinct I possessed screaming at me to stop. Behind me, from the top of the stairs, I could hear Max, a sound I had never heard from him before. Not a bark, not a whine, something between the two, sustained and low and frightened. I reached the laundry room door. I heard something on the other side, a sound, faint, deliberate. My body made the decision before my mind did. I turned and ran, up the stairs, past Max, through the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the lock on the basement door. I got it shut. I got it locked. I stood in the kitchen with my back against the wall, and Max pressed against my legs, barking for the first time in months, his whole body rigid. I called my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice carrying that careful calm of someone woken from sleep. I told her everything. The voice, the basement, Max, the name. I told her it was Uncle Daniel. I told her I was certain. The silence that followed lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she spoke, quietly, in a voice I had never heard from her before. Uncle Daniel had died of cancer several years ago. That was why the visits had stopped. She had never found the right moment to tell me, and then too much time had passed and she had simply not told me. The room tilted. I sat down on the kitchen floor without meaning to. I called the police after I hung up, reported a possible intruder. They arrived within 20 minutes, searched every room, checked every window and door. The basement lock was exactly as I had left it. The house was empty. They left with the careful, neutral expressions of officers who have decided not to say what they're thinking. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't go near the basement door for the week that followed. Max refused to look at it entirely. He would route himself through other rooms rather than past the hallway where the stairs went down. I sold the house 14 months later. I still hear his voice sometimes. Not often, but in the specific silence of certain nights when the air has that particular quality and everything goes still. I hear it. My name, the way he said it, rising from somewhere below. I know what I heard that January night. I know the house was searched and found empty. I know my uncle had been dead for years before I stood at the bottom of those stairs and heard him speak. What I don't know, what I have never been able to answer in all the years since, is what was waiting behind that laundry room door, and why, of everything it could have said, it chose his voice to call me down. I want to tell you something before this story begins. By the end of it, every sound you can't immediately explain, every creak beneath your feet, every stillness that feels slightly too deliberate, is going to mean something different to you than it does right now. I'm not sorry about that, because it took me months of living inside that house to understand what I was actually dealing with. And the worst part, the detail that still finds me in quiet rooms at night, isn't the footsteps or the tapping or even the cough. It's the blanket. The blanket that wasn't old, that wasn't dusty, that had clearly, recently, been used by someone who had been listening to me sleep. I was 24 when I moved in, and the deciding factor was simple. The rent was the cheapest I had found by a significant margin. That should have been my first question, not my first relief, my first question. The house was old in a way that had nothing to do with charm. Not the kind of old that gets described as historic or full of character in rental listings. This was the kind of old that carries weight, the kind that creaks when no one is moving through it, as if the structure itself is turning something over in its memory and can't quite let it go. The setup was straightforward on paper. The upper floor had been converted into a self-contained living space. One bedroom, a narrow kitchen, a bathroom, a living room barely wide enough for a couch and a television. I rented that. The landlord lived out of state, a distant presence I interacted with almost never. He struck me, on the rare occasions I did encounter him, as someone who wanted the arrangement to be as uncomplicated as possible for everyone involved, himself most of all. The first floor was empty, vacant, under renovation supposedly, off limits. That was what I was told. For a while, I had no reason to doubt it. I settled into the rhythms of the house the way you do when you live alone, learning which pipes ticked at what hour, which floorboards announced themselves under specific pressure, where the drafts came from when the wind picked up at night. Old houses have their own language, and you learn it gradually, until the sounds that once startled you become background, become comfort, become the texture of ordinary evenings. I told myself I was comfortable. I believed it until the house told me otherwise. It was close to 2 a.m. on an unremarkable Tuesday when I heard it for the first time. I was in bed, half submerged in that loose, drifting state between wakefulness and sleep, phone in hand, thoughts slowing down toward nothing. Then, a footstep. Not above me, not outside against the siding, directly below. My thumb stopped moving on the screen before my conscious mind had fully processed the sound. Some part of me registered it faster than thought, a spike of alertness, animal and immediate, that brought everything into sudden focus. Silence followed. Then another step. Slow, weighted, deliberate enough that I could feel the faint vibration of it transferring through the floorboards and into the frame of my bed. I sat up and stared at the floor as though I could see through it. A third step, a fourth. Someone was moving through the empty first floor of my house. I ran the logic immediately, the way you do when fear needs something to argue against. The downstairs was locked. The landlord was out of state. There was no furniture, no tenants, no reason for any living person to be standing beneath me at 2 o'clock in the morning. The explanation had to be something structural. Pipes, thermal expansion, old wood finding new positions in the cold. I lay back down. I repeated this to myself until I almost meant it. The next morning, I checked the downstairs door. Locked, dusty around the frame. I opened it and looked inside. Bare floors, bare walls, nothing disturbed, no footprints in the grime that had settled over everything. I felt foolish standing there in the daylight, holding a door open to an empty room, heart still slightly elevated from 8 hours earlier. But foolishness and fear are not the same thing. And fear, I was learning, doesn't leave simply because you've embarrassed it with logic. It waits. 2 quiet nights followed. I began to relax. Then, at 1:30 a.m. on the 3rd night, it came back. 3 footsteps, a pause, 2 more, a stop. It continued for nearly 2 full minutes. I stood in the center of my living room with the television muted and stared at the floor, listening to a pattern that had no business being a pattern. Old houses settle, yes, wood expands and contracts with temperature, but wood does not pause. Wood does not resume. Wood does not produce the specific, unmistakable rhythm of a person crossing a room, stopping, and crossing it again. I texted Scott, half joking, trying to give the fear somewhere smaller to live, and told him the downstairs tenant must have finally moved in. He sent back a laughing emoji. I didn't laugh, because it kept happening. Night after night, always late, always below me. And then it evolved. A cabinet door closing softly. A sound that wasn't structural, wasn't atmospheric. A sound that required a hand. I called the landlord. He sounded irritated rather than concerned. No one else had keys, he said. He was out of state. Old houses make noise. If I was really worried, I could call the police, but he didn't think I'd find anything. That conversation did something specific to my fear. It didn't reduce it. It isolated it. Because now I wasn't just hearing things I couldn't explain. I was hearing them alone, with no one willing to take them seriously. I came home close to 3 a.m. on a Friday and knew immediately that something was different. Nothing visible had changed. Nothing moved, nothing displaced, no obvious sign of disturbance. But the air inside the house had a quality I can only describe as recently vacated. The feeling of walking into a space that had been occupied moments before your arrival. A warmth where there shouldn't have been warmth. A stillness that felt chosen rather than natural. I stood in my doorway and listened. Then a dull thud from below. Heavy, directional. Something contacting a wall with force. I stepped back. My foot caught the edge of the rug and I stumbled. And the footsteps started again. Faster this time, more purposeful, moving in a straight line beneath me rather than the wandering pattern I had grown accustomed to. I left without going further into the house. I sat in my car with shaking hands and called the police. 2 officers arrived and conducted a thorough check. Front door, back door, windows, basement access, every room on the 1st floor. Nothing. No forced entry, no signs of disturbance, no person. One of them explained, not unkindly, that temperature shifts cause old houses to produce sounds that can seem remarkably like footsteps. He wasn't condescending about it, but I could read the subtext clearly enough. Stress, imagination, overreaction. I wanted to accept that. I genuinely tried. The house made it impossible. In the days that followed, the downstairs door appeared slightly ajar when I came home. Just an inch. Just enough to notice, just enough to be certain I had locked it after the officers left. A smell near one of the downstairs windows. Cigarette smoke. Faint but fresh. The kind that clings to air for only minutes after the source has moved away. I don't smoke. The nearest neighbors kept to themselves, but someone had been standing outside that window. Recently. The night I will never stop returning to, I was almost asleep when the footsteps below my bedroom stopped. Not at a distance, not in the hallway or the kitchen, directly beneath me, beneath my bed, beneath the exact point in the room where I was lying. Then silence, complete and total and deliberate, the silence of something that has stopped moving and started listening. I held my breath without deciding to. 3 soft taps came up through the floor. A pause. 3 more. Same location. Same rhythm. Same careful, measured pressure. Not random, not structural, not anything that a house produces on its own. Something had noticed me noticing it, and had decided for reasons I cannot explain and do not want to understand, to respond. I texted Scott with hands that weren't steady. Can I come over? The tapping started again while I waited for his reply. He answered in under a minute. Come over. I left without packing, without turning lights off, without looking behind me. Scott came back with me the next day. We checked the upstairs first, then went down together. The first floor looked exactly as it always had, bare, cold, undisturbed. Then Scott crouched near the base of a kitchen cabinet. Inside the back corner, barely visible in the shadow, a cigarette butt, not ancient, not buried under dust, fresh enough to have no business being there. The story changed in that moment. Whatever I had been telling myself, acoustics, old wood, an overworked imagination, ended there on the floor of that empty kitchen. Someone had been inside, not once, regularly. The landlord, when I called, did not dismiss me this time. He came the following morning and found it within an hour. A back window with a broken latch, the kind that could be pushed inward from outside with minimal force. Enough for someone who knew it was there, someone who had been using the empty house, moving through it at night, listening from below while I slept above. I went back one final time to collect my belongings. I was upstairs, moving quickly, focused entirely on getting out, when I heard it from the hallway below. A cough, not distant, not ambiguous, clear, human, immediate, the sound of a person who had momentarily forgotten to be quiet. I left everything I hadn't already grabbed. The police found the evidence this time. Fresh marks on the window frame, disturbed dirt on the sill, and inside a downstairs closet. A blanket. Not rotted, not abandoned years ago and forgotten, recently used. I moved out that weekend. I have never gone back, but I notice it now in ways I didn't before. The specific quality of silence in an unfamiliar house, the creak that comes from the wrong direction, the air in a room that feels like it has only just stopped being occupied. And when I hear something I can't immediately explain, my mind no longer asks whether it's the house settling. It asks something else, something I wish I could unlearn. How long has someone been there? And do they know that I know?